In 2023, deep in the ocean off the coast of Alaska, a team of researchers found something they couldn't explain. They were operating from a NOAA research vessel, conducting a systematic survey of the seafloor. The mission relied on a remotely operated vehicle, a high-tech submersible capable of transmitting live video from the depths. It was a routine scientific deployment, intended to map a world that is rarely seen by human eyes. The ROV descended nearly 2 miles below the surface, passing through the twilight zone and into a realm of complete darkness. At this depth, scientists expect to find a landscape defined by volcanic rock, thick sediment, and specialized life forms adapted to the extreme pressure. The team on the surface is physically removed from this environment, observing the deep seafloor only through the artificial light provided by the ROV's cameras. Because this environment follows consistent biological and geological patterns, an object that defies those categories presents a significant scientific puzzle. As the vehicle scanned the seabed, a strange object suddenly appeared in the beam of the headlights. It didn't look like any rock the team had seen before, and it lacked the clear characteristics of a deep-sea animal. The object was small and smooth, with a striking, uniform shape. Its appearance was so unusual that it challenged the team's immediate understanding of the local environment. It was golden in color, reflecting the ROV's light against the dark, muted tones of the seafloor mud. Finding something this smooth and metallic-looking is rare in an environment where seawater and high pressure usually corrode exposed surfaces. The object didn't appear to be a natural formation of the local geology, nor did it look like debris that had drifted down from the surface. Encountering an unidentified object 2 miles deep shifted the team's focus toward an investigation of the unknown. As the ROV moved closer, it revealed a dark, hollow opening on one side of the orb. The control room fell silent as the researchers, who have spent decades studying the deep sea, tried to process what they were seeing. Looking at the screen, one scientist noted, "I just hope it's not something trying to get out." That observation suggested the orb might be something more complex than a simple mineral deposit. Within the scientific community, the mystery became known by a simple name, the Golden Orb. Despite extensive review by marine biologists and specialized deep-sea geologists, no one could reach a consensus on what the object actually was. Researchers had successfully uncovered a hollow golden mystery in one of the darkest, most inaccessible locations on the planet. It leaves one question unanswered. What created the Golden Orb, and why is there a hole in its side? Far from any coastline, this research vessel sits on a quiet stretch of the open ocean, but the target of this expedition is 2 miles straight down. As you descend, the sunlight fades rapidly, completely vanishing by the time you reach the 3,000-foot mark. Down here, the weight of the water above creates a crushing atmospheric pressure. Any pocket of air or unadapted structure is instantly pulverized. Humans cannot survive exposure to this environment. To even look around, we have to rely on heavy, armored technology, like this remotely operated vehicle. Because the conditions are so brutal, the only things expected to survive on the abyssal plain are the hardest, most resilient geological formations. So you can imagine the confusion when the remote cameras panned across the barren, dark rock and illuminated a distinct, bright golden shape. It was anchored directly to the jagged stone surface, sitting perfectly still. Against a landscape defined by sharp angles and heavy pressure, the object looked completely out of place. It appeared delicate. Its smooth, curved exterior didn't look like a mineral deposit. It looked organic. A soft, seemingly fragile structure surviving at a depth where the pressure destroys almost everything else shouldn't be physically possible. It creates an immediate biological paradox. Remote operators zoomed the cameras in to inspect the surface. Up close, the texture appeared noticeably soft. Researchers quickly crossed out geological classifications, like metal ores, basalt, and limestone. It wasn't solid stone. Shifting to biological forms, they struck through sponges, corals, and anemones. It lacks typical deep-sea markers. That leaves a single, blank, unknown category. Inside the control room, the researchers realized they were staring at something that had never been documented before. When an object defies every established geological and biological category, traditional observation hits a wall. The scientists were forced to start guessing. Their attention focused on the most alarming physical detail, a wide, gaping hole located near the bottom edge of the structure. One possibility is that the structural damage came from the outside. Something in the darkness violently punctured the soft casing to get in. The alternative is equally unsettling. The hole could be an exit wound. This implies something incubated inside the protective casing and eventually pushed its way out into the abyss. This led the team to ask a very specific question. Were they looking at the hatched egg of an unknown predator species? That single tear transforms the orb from an interesting deep-sea curiosity into the site of an active biological event. Something had either entered or something had left. Staring at it through a camera lens was no longer enough. To get real answers, the team had to collect it. This presented a massive engineering challenge. The remotely operated vehicle is equipped with rigid, powerful robotic arms designed for moving rocks and heavy equipment, not handling something soft. The pilot had to make incredibly precise, gentle movements, using a suction tube to carefully loosen the anomaly from the rock without tearing it apart. After several anxious minutes, the object finally slipped free and was secured inside the vehicle's onboard collection chamber. Safely extracting a fragile, unknown specimen from the deep ocean requires immense skill, but it was only the first step. The vehicle began the long, slow ascent through the water column, carrying its mysterious biological payload miles upward. Hours later, it broke the surface. The object had survived the extreme pressure changes intact. It was quickly moved from the chaotic, crushing environment of the abyss into the bright, highly controlled space of the ship's laboratory. Now, the researchers face a completely different set of challenges. They have to physically touch the specimen, extract samples, and prepare to dissect it. The deep-sea retrieval operation is complete, but the forensic investigation to figure out what hatched from or attacked this golden anomaly is just beginning. This remote-operated vehicle is illuminating the benthic zone, the lowest ecological region of the ocean. Down here, miles below the surface, researchers recovered an anomalous golden orb. The specimen was transported to the surface and brought aboard an isolated research vessel, a sterile, floating laboratory operating far from mainland biological contamination. Upon arrival in the clinical setting, the object presented an immediate challenge. There was no scientific record of it. No prior documentation. It was completely uncharacterized. Before researchers could even begin to classify it, they had to answer the most basic question of material composition. Was this geological, biological, or an artificial anomaly? To categorize deep-sea matter like this, science requires stripping away all prior assumptions. The investigation must begin at a zero state, relying only on fundamental observations. This diagram illustrates a taxonomic decision tree. It's a rigid framework of scientific elimination, branching to separate the inorganic from the organic. The first filter requires macrostructural analysis, looking for geometric rigidity, indicating minerals, or cellular flexibility, pointing to life, before any chemical test. Visual inspection alone fails in marine biology. The extreme pressures of the deep ocean routinely produce bizarre mineral formations and highly adapted biological mimicry. Knowing what an object looks like provides no absolute data. Researchers must physically interact with the anomaly, probing its surface to determine its foundational material properties and composition. The golden orb forces the team to establish absolute material truths. Until those physical parameters are verified, advanced molecular testing cannot be justified. Physical testing begins under harsh clinical light. Gloved hands carefully probe the golden membrane to measure its surface tension and structural response. The data from these interactions is immediate and precise. The material yields to pressure. It is soft, fleshy, and highly pliable. This physical finding provides the first logical deduction. A fleshy structure definitively eliminates mineralogical origins. Furthermore, the absence of synthetic polymers means an artificial origin is discarded, leaving the biological node mathematically isolated. The baseline is established. Through morphological elimination, the orb is proven to be a biological entity. Proving the object is organic resolves the first layer of the tree, but it initiates a far more difficult phase. The team now has to determine exactly what kind of biology sits on the examination table. Morphological analysis has severe limits. Knowing a tissue sample is fleshy tells us nothing about its evolutionary lineage. To map that lineage, the investigation shifts to molecular characterization. Researchers must excise physical tissue samples from the orb's membrane for genomic extraction. This image shows the standard laboratory protocol for isolating genetic material. The raw physical tissue is successfully dissolved, separated, and meticulously prepped in a gel electrophoresis tray. What happens here is a conceptual translation. Tangible biological matter is converted into readable computational data. In typical terrestrial biology, running this extracted genetic sequence against known scientific databases returns an automated match almost instantly. By moving from physical touch to molecular extraction, the investigation transitions from measuring physical composition to reading deep evolutionary history. The DNA extraction was successful, but the lab immediately hit a wall. The sequencing algorithm failed to return a match. This visual matrix demonstrates the genomic reference bottleneck. Biological identification algorithms are limited by pre-existing reference libraries. The deep ocean remains a massive ecological blind spot. When the orb's DNA queries the sector, it returns a zero direct matches error. Without a direct one-to-one match, the scientists must abandon simple database lookups. They pivot to massive computational comparative analysis. Instead of a quick database hit, the system must execute a grueling search, processing fragmented genetic alignments across millions of distant evolutionary cousins. The weeks of waiting for these results to process do not reflect a laboratory failure. They provide a stark measurement of how little humanity knows about deep ocean biodiversity. Days slowly turn into weeks. The lab's computers run continuous, high-volume alignment algorithms, processing the heavy computational load. This display shows the specific task. The uncharacterized genome is mapped against known species to spot overlapping nucleotide base pairs. The algorithm hunts for conserved sequences, tiny snippets of DNA that remain unchanged across vast distances of evolutionary ancestry. The process requires extensive error correction. The algorithm must continuously identify, process, and discard frequent false positives and evolutionary dead ends. It creates a split reality in the investigation. The fleshy orb sits perfectly still on the laboratory bench, while its digital genome furiously scans the entire history of life. In frontier taxonomy, a waiting period is never idle. It is a state of hyperactive, high-volume computational deduction. After weeks of continuous processing, the massive run of comparative analysis completes. The chaotic, raw alignment data finally resolves into a stable, mathematically sound pattern. Matching these distant genetic links provides a foundation. Even if the exact species is completely new to science, researchers can now assign the orb to a broad taxonomic family. The final step requires merging the initial data from the morphological tests, the soft, pliable membrane, with the newly resolved phylogenetic lineage to construct a complete organism profile. Resolving an uncharacterized anomaly demands this exact intersection. Basic physical observation must be combined with massive data computation. The biological identity of the Golden Orb definitively takes shape, officially earning its place on the evolutionary map. The investigation started with a completely unknown, featureless physical object. Now it has been successfully plotted as a specific, mathematically verified point in the history of biology. Definitively characterizing this single golden orb slightly expands the global reference library. It incrementally eases the genomic reference bottleneck for whatever discovery comes next. And there will be more discoveries. Countless other bizarre, uncatalogued biological structures remain hidden in the benthic zone, waiting to be found. Extreme environments force science to move deliberately. Proving true discovery requires the rigor to test foundational physical structures and the computational patience to map the unknown. 2 miles below the surface, the ocean floor is a harsh place. Temperatures hover near freezing, and no sunlight penetrates the darkness. Yet, against this barren backdrop, an investigative remotely operated vehicle caught sight of an anomaly, a smooth, golden, dome-shaped object. Without context, the vacuum of information immediately filled with speculation. Early guesses suggested corroded industrial debris from a sunken ship or an extraterrestrial artifact. But looking closely at the structure revealed a highly specific detail. On the lower edge of the dome sat a deliberate, perfectly formed tear. Finding an unidentified material with a clean puncture on a desolate ocean floor left researchers without a clear way to categorize the discovery. Initial analysis quickly discarded the extraterrestrial theory. The object lacked unique isotopic signatures associated with cosmic radiation, and there were no signs of a high-speed impact in the surrounding sediment. It also failed the test for artificial origins. Researchers found 0 signs of synthetic polymer decay, and close-up imaging showed no machining marks or industrial seams. Even biologically, it didn't behave like a standalone organism. It lacked the internal motility and cellular structures required to classify it as a large, active, single-celled anomaly. Instead, testing its structural integrity and texture yielded clear results. The material was composed entirely of tightly woven organic proteins. If an object is organic but doesn't exhibit the traits of a living creature, logic points to a specific function. It is the byproduct of a biological reproduction cycle. The golden orb was, in fact, a biological egg casing. Biologists suspect the parent organism is a deep-sea tubular sponge, a species adapted to safely incubate its offspring on the rocky ocean floor. We see comparable reproductive strategies across other marine life, where embryos are sealed inside durable, translucent casings to shield them from deep-sea predators. Returning to the physical evidence, forensic modeling of the distinct hole showed no frayed edges from ROV collisions, no brittle fracturing from chemical degradation, and no serrated marks from predators. The puncture was deliberate from the inside out. A newly formed organism had successfully incubated within the casing and already broken through into the abyss. The narrative focus quickly shifted away from the egg casing itself and toward the extreme hostility of the location where it survived. This egg was anchored miles below the photic zone, far beyond the reach of solar energy. At this depth, extremophile biology has to contend with crushing hydrostatic pressure, where the weight of the water above exerts thousands of pounds of force on every square inch. Yet, in absolute silence and total darkness, fragile marine life continues to reproduce, hatch, and survive against staggering physical odds. While society often looks toward the lifeless void of outer space to find the unknown, Earth's own biosphere remains largely untamed. The golden egg proves Earth holds profound secrets. The deeper we explore the ocean, we realize we have only just begun.